Hey, good evening, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. Hello, Patriots, fellow Americans. This is Don Woolley talking to you from Sahuarita, Arizona. And before we get started, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel. There's you'll see a subscription button when you search for the Sahuarita Tea Party. And there's a little bell there. If you click on that little bell, you'll be reminded of when we have a live broadcast, a live stream. It'll let you know. So it's kind of handy. I have it set for some other channels that we look at. So anyway, welcome everybody. Tonight we're going to be talking about coronavirus. And as you can see, we have Paul Fitch, who's a local authority on survival, and he's going to talk about coronavirus tonight. Things you can do for your family to get ready for if anything happens in the future in this country. Right now, the spread in the country in the world. There are some hot spots, and whether it's really contained or not remains to be seen. You may have watched President Trump yesterday, and he talked about it with his folks. And he obviously showed concern, but tried to calm everybody about it. So let's start this out with, I'm going to play a video by a group called MedCram. It's a doctor that gives daily updates on the coronavirus. So I'll start that, and then when that's finished, we'll look at the Dr. Lin video that I sent out to the Google group last week, or early this week. And he had some good advice for everybody. So let me start with the video, and so here's MedCram. Hold on.
Confirmed 82,164, total deaths 2,801, total recovered 32,897. We see more of a continuation of what we've been seeing in the past. Let's go to the Worldometer. We're going to talk a little bit about testing today and also the positivity rate. In UK, they have well over 7,000 tests, of which only 13 are positive, and that's a very low positivity rate. Of course, in Italy, where they actually have an outbreak, they've done over 9,000 tests, of which only 470 are positive. It's about a 5% positivity rate. In France, 2.2 positivity rate. In Austria, 321 tests, of which 2 are positive. And then in the United States, notice we've only done 445 concluded tests, of which 14 are positive, and that's around 3.1 positivity rate. These tests are not as sensitive as you may think. I think you're going to be surprised that the sensitivity on these tests are only around 70%. And so it is possible to have a negative test and to still be infected with the coronavirus. We see that there are so far 334 new cases and 1 death in South Korea. And the number of confirmed cases is expected to jump in the coming days as health authorities have started testing more than 210,000 members of this church in Daegu. If we look at the numbers coming out of China and the rest of the world in terms of total deaths, that seems to be leveling off. And if we look at the number of daily new cases outside of China, that has hit its highest amount ever on February 26 with daily cases of 569. I want to go to a local site, Eyewitness News, here in Southern California. A new case that has been detected in Northern California in a resident who has not traveled overseas. A couple of things that I want you to be aware of. This patient is a resident of Solano County. Turns out that Solano County is the home to Travis Air Force Base, where Americans returning from overseas were quarantined. The patient was transferred back on February 19th, so that was about a week ago, from undisclosed hospital to UC Davis Health. And that is the hospital in Sacramento for the University of California, Davis. Patient had already been intubated, was on a ventilator, and was given droplet precaution orders because of an undiagnosed and suspected viral condition. So there are other viruses that can do this. Now, at the time, it seems as though UC Davis had asked the CDC for testing, but this was not done at the time. And if you go to the CDC website, it tells you what their requirements are for testing, although they do put a disclaimer that they will look at a case-by-case basis. But essentially, unless you traveled to Wuhan or that part of China, they weren't really going to be doing that kind of testing. So it's unclear how eventually UC Davis was able to get the CDC to test this patient. But they did. And eventually on Sunday, the CDC ordered the COVID-19 testing of the patient. At that time, the patient was put into airborne precautions. What does this mean? It means that anybody going into that room had to have an N95 mask and had to go into contact isolation precautions. That means they would have to wear a gown, gloves. They may even have to wear eyewear protection. If they were not able to do that, then they would have to go under something called PAPRs, where they basically go in with a mask that was vented. From Sunday to Wednesday, it took for the CDC to confirm finally that the patient's test was positive. A small number of employees were to go home and monitor their temperature for any kind of fever or things of that nature. And the key here is to recognize apparently this patient had no travel to that part of the world. They go on to say here, at this time the patient's exposure is unknown. It's possible that this could be an instance of what they call community spread of COVID-19, which would be the first time that this has happened in the United States. It's also possible, however, they said that the patient may have been exposed to a returned traveler who was infected. Of course, this brings up the issue of anybody that comes in with fever or signs and symptoms of a viral illness and shortness of breath could be potentially a carrier of this novel coronavirus. And that's why it's really important to have lots of personal protective equipment at hospitals where they belong instead of running out at hospitals. So it's really important that hospitals have the ability to acquire personal protective equipment, because you don't want to show up to a hospital where the employees there or the doctors or the nurses don't have the adequate amount of protection so that they don't pass the virus on to anybody else that might show up at that hospital. So please do not take masks and protective equipment from hospitals for your own use. But this really brings up a big issue, and that is, how do you test people for coronavirus? How do you know quickly whether or not this person that's coming in has this virus? Obviously, if we see here in this case, it took them from Wednesday when they actually got the positive test all the way from Sunday when they first ordered the tests. You can see that that's not the optimal situation, especially when we add to the situation that this test is not really that sensitive, meaning that if you have a negative test, you can absolutely rule it out. So enter a study that I think is going to be important, and that is this Science Daily news article, which talks about this article that was just published in Radiology called CT Provides the Best Diagnosis for COVID-19. We'll put a link to it in the description below. Basically, what they did is in China, they looked at over 1,000 patients, and they did this reverse transcriptase polymerase chain reaction, which is what RT-PCR stands for. This is where you look for the actual RNA of the patient, and compared it to the classical findings that they see on CT scan. Here's another news item of the same article. So title is CT Provides Best Diagnosis for COVID-19. And it says the study from China shows that chest CT demonstrates better sensitivity than this blood test looking for the actual PCR of the virus. Remember that halfway through the epidemic last month, they changed the criteria and the definition for the diagnosis of COVID-19. So you can see here in a study of more than 1,000 patients that was published in the journal article Radiology, which we'll link to so you can look at it for yourself, chest CT actually outperformed lab testing in the diagnosis of 2019 novel coronavirus. And this was looked at in Wuhan, China. So it's important to understand that you have to make an early diagnosis of COVID-19 if you're going to isolate and you're going to prevent the spread of that disease. As we talked about earlier in a early JAMA article, 41% of patients who contracted COVID-19 did so in the hospital, and the majority of those 41% were healthcare workers. According to the latest guidelines by the Chinese government, the diagnosis must be confirmed by reverse transcriptase polymerase chain reaction, or the gene sequencing. They say here, however, that those throat samples are only about 30 to 60% positive at initial presentation. Having a low sensitivity implies that there's going to be a lot of people who will be negative initially, and you're going to miss those people. Those people are going to come through into your hospital and potentially infect other people, specifically people who are there to help, and causing them to be taken out of work and put into isolation most likely. And so they say here that early diagnosis of COVID-19 is crucial for the disease treatment and control. Compared to RT-PCR, that is the genetic testing, they say here that chest CT imaging may be a more reliable, practical, and rapid method to diagnose and assess COVID-19, especially in the epidemic area. So why did they think that? Well, let's take a look and see the study. There was over 1,000 patients who underwent both CT, chest, and RT-PCR tests from January 6th to February 6th. And what they did was they looked at all of those people who had a positive PCR, and there was about 601 of those, and everybody that had a positive CT scan, and there was 888 of those. And then they asked the question, well, what's the sensitivity, what's the specificity, and what's the accuracy? And what they found was that about 81% of patients with a negative RT-PCR but a positive CT scan were reclassified as highly likely or probable cases with COVID-19 based on the comprehensive analysis of clinical symptoms, typical CT manifestations, and dynamic CT follow-ups. What they mean by that, it were getting worse and they were consistent. They also found in a lot of these that the initial test may have been negative, but that follow-up tests turned positive, confirming in a lot of these cases the original CT findings. Let's review those results. The results showed that 59% of these patients that they tested had PCR results that were positive. 88% had positive CT scans. They said that the sensitivity, and this is something that you want to be very, very high in this situation, because something that is very sensitive means that if it is negative, you can practically rule it out. And as it turned out, that sensitivity of chest CT was 97%, based on positive RT-PCR results. In patients with negative RT-PCR results, 75% of those patients had positive CT findings, and of those, 48% were highly likely cases. So what we're seeing here is that CT scans may be the way to get a quick screening of whether or not your patient with fever is likely to have COVID-19. But the question is, what are the findings on CT? It's good enough to know that you should get a CT, but what is it that you should be looking for? I'm going to link in the description below a YouTube video describes the findings on CT scan of known cases of COVID-19. And that concludes our update for today. Realize that many of these videos are made the evening before they get released because I still am working in the intensive care unit seeing patients every single day. And so this is something that I do at the end of the day because we as healthcare providers are on the front line and we have to be prepared. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so that's the doctor from MedCram. Very interesting information. Probably everyone doesn't realize all the testing that's going on and that there are some sensitivity issues with the test with the swab. So anyway, now we're going to play a video from Dr. Lin, Dr. Peter Lin. He's a family physician from Canada. I sent this video out earlier in the week, and he has some good personal advice for everybody about the coronavirus. And so let's get that started here very quickly. And it'll be right up. Hold on.
So we need to get the facts straight. How does this virus work? How does it transmit? Where does it want to go? And let's protect ourselves. I'm Dr. Peter Lin. I'm a family physician in Toronto, Canada. The coronavirus is a family of viruses that can cause as mild things as just a common cold, all the way up to SARS or MERS. These are these bad pneumonias that we're talking about. And basically what these viruses are, they look like a tennis ball with all these spikes sticking out of it. And depending on the type of spike, it allows that virus to attach to certain places. So some viruses, they have the spike that attaches to your nose. So basically you just get a common cold. But the SARS virus and this new virus that we're talking about has the spike that allows it to attach to the cells in your lung. And when it attaches there, it puts in information to make photocopies of itself. So it uses our equipment to make more viruses.
I'm declaring a public health emergency of international concern over the global outbreak of novel coronavirus.
Most of the coronaviruses live in animals. In this particular case, it was from Wuhan. There was a fish market where they were selling live animals. And the thought is that the virus was in a live animal, then it crossed into a human. But then what we found was that people were getting sick in terms of healthcare workers, in terms of family members that were looking after them, which now meant that the virus can pass from human to another human. Just like all viruses, it needs to reach a target, which is your lung. And it has to get there with your help. It has no feet and no wings. So therefore it needs us to move it there. So that's why we keep saying, don't hang around sneezy people because you're gonna breathe it in. And don't touch your face because that's how the virus is gonna get in. The masks are helpful, but they're not necessary because they're leaky. The ones that you and I buy basically have pockets here, so therefore the virus can get in. What the masks really do is they stop us from touching our face. If you're sick, we tend to mask you, so therefore you're not spewing out the viruses to other people sitting around you. The true people that have the real masks are the N95. Those are sealed. These are for the doctors that may be caring for their patients. So in the beginning, the coronavirus will cause kind of like flu-like symptoms or a cold. So people just get the stuffy nose, that kind of thing. But you'll understand that as soon as that virus starts manufacturing in your lung cells, they're producing all these copies of the virus, all of a sudden now you kill the lung cells. So now you can't exchange oxygen. And that's why one of the early symptoms is people get very short of breath and they tend to have a difficult time breathing, and that's why they end up in hospital. So currently, unfortunately, we don't have a direct treatment for the coronavirus. So we don't have a medication that can kill it off. And so it's really supportive. So in other words, the patient can't breathe, we give them oxygen, help them to breathe. They can't drink, so therefore we give them fluids to support them. Their kidneys begin to shut down, we help them with all those things. So it's a very supportive process. This is a new virus that we've never seen before. So our immune system, our army, are having a hard time figuring out what to do. So usually what we have to do is we make something called antibodies. So these are things that can grab onto the spikes that we see on the virus, and it'll get rid of the virus for you, and that will actually bring you back to good health. So therefore the elderly may have a worse outcome, and of course the young children. So the babies, their immune system is not so good either, so they may not make those antibodies as well. So just remember, your hands may be with virus. Virus cannot hurt you because it can't get through the skin, but the moment I do this, now I've brought the virus right to where it wants to go. So let's remember not to touch our hands to our face. So let's say you think that you might have been on a plane or you might have bumped into somebody that has it. What should you do? So the first thing is to contact a healthcare worker to tell them that potentially you have it. If you're feeling symptoms and you're going to go into a facility, call ahead. Okay, so whether you're calling the paramedics or whether you're calling the hospital or your doctor, just mention that you were on a flight. If you don't have any symptoms, then what we do is a little bit of a self-quarantine. In other words, we can just keep you away from other people, and so you don't go into parties, don't go with your friends, don't go into public transportation. So we can contain it very easily by making sure that you do a self-confinement, so to speak, for the, let's say, 7 to 14 days is the longest incubation time. So after that, if you're feeling well, then you don't have anything to worry about. So if we get the facts right, then we don't have to be overly worried, but we do the right things so that we don't get the virus ourselves and that we don't pass it on to others. And if we look after each other in this way, this virus will have nowhere to go. It needs us to move it, it needs us to make copies for it, and if we don't help it, then the virus will stop. So we have the power to do that right now.
Okay, so thank you to Dr. Lin for that. We're going to give Paul Fitch a call now and see if we can get him on the live stream. So stand by, and we'll start getting his view about some things you may need to do to prevent and protect yourselves. So stand by, and I'll give Paul a call right now.
You probably won't last 3 hours in North Dakota without shelter, and you probably won't die in 3 hours in Arizona in the springtime. But these are rules of thumb that will help you make a decision about what you want to do in the way of priorities. 3 days without water can be a significant factor. We can go 3 weeks without food, and as you'll see a little bit later on in this, I'm suggesting being prepared for 6 weeks. So we want to make sure we have enough of our supplies on hand to make sure we get through past all these threes. So next slide.
Should be coming up.
Okay. Must have to go all the way to New York and back, huh?
Yeah, there is a delay. What to watch and listen for.
Okay. Well, the main things to watch and listen for is what we call area intelligence, and that means keeping an eye on what's going on in the Tucson area and nationally in the United States. Are we going to have if we start having a rapid increase in cases in the United States, or a rapid increase in cases in Tucson and the surrounding area, that's a sign that things are going downhill rapidly, and we need to increase our preparations. The best time to prepare, of course, is right now. The shelves are still full, and you can still get a few N95 masks, for instance, around the area. I looked over at Ace Hardware today, and they must have had about 50 or 60 when I went over a couple of days ago and bought mine. And as of this afternoon, they only seem to have about 10 or 12. So if you're looking for an N95 mask, you might want to go kind of quickly and try to pick one up. So you want to listen to the local news radios and just kind of keep an ear peeled for how the cases are stacking up. If the number of cases increases significantly, be prepared to go into quarantine yourself. Next.
So, Paul, I wanted to ask you: is there a time limit on an N95 mask? Is there a certain period of time you can wear it, or can you wear it multiple times for a period of time?
You can wear it as long as it's not physically dirty. It will stop all the small particulates in the air. I don't know. They indicated from what I've been able to hear about the N95 mask that it is some protection for you from the coronavirus. The different professionals have different ideas. I've heard some people say, well, the main thing it does is it keeps you from touching your mouth and your nose with your hands that have probably or could possibly have picked up the virus. It doesn't protect your eyes, of course, if you rub your eyes after you've gotten the virus on your hands. But that's one of its primary benefits, is it keeps you from putting your fingers in your mouth or scratching your nose. And as Dr. Lin said, these things go into your body. They need a transportation system to get into your body. So the mask will help with that somewhat. It also, if you have the virus, will protect other people from you, which is good too, because you won't be exhaling the virus out into the atmosphere. The next slide, as you can see, speaks to a government-mandated quarantine. The government, um, if you're familiar with FEMA, things happen very slowly and then they happen very fast. And they don't always happen in the best interest of the people they're supposed to be helping. The government will get panicked and get heavy-handed. You may remember down in Katrina, the sheriff and the National Guard started going around to people's houses and collecting guns. This may be something that they do in a case like this because it's possible that they will nationalize the National Guard and send them out to check people and see if they're sick and then take them to the hospital. And when they start picking up people and carrying them out of their houses, somebody's not going to be happy about that. And they didn't have that problem in China because nobody in China has a gun. But here in the States, they may find that that's a hazardous duty. So the better prepared you are, the less likelihood you'll have to be of going out and getting more food and more supplies, possibly more water. So to be prepared is very important, and it can save you having to interface with the police or the National Guard or some other official people who are going to try to put you back in your place or take you someplace you don't want to go.
Right. Another question I have, Paul, is, and on the next slide, it's how long you should prepare for. And I'll let you talk to this, but they're quarantining people from 7 to 14 days for the incubation period. So, and that's kind of the standard they're using in the U.S. and most places. They've put these people in a 14-day quarantine. If the people that came off the Japanese cruise ship, they were in a 14-day quarantine, and they were about in their 12th day, I think, and they took them off the ship, the Americans, and brought them back here and put them into another 14-day quarantine so that they could watch the entire period evolve. And I notice you recommend a minimum of 6 weeks, so maybe you can talk to that.
Yeah. My belief is that you're right. There's about a 14 to 21-day incubation period. If we start getting cases here in the Green Valley, Sahuarita area, we'll start knowing about it 14 to 21 days after those people have been exposed to the virus, and then they'll start getting sick and showing symptoms. They will also have been infecting other people in that time period. And so that your 14 to 21 days is going to be a rolling 14 to 21 days. And people in your neighborhood, in your area, or any place you might have to go could be coming out of that 14-day, 21-day incubation period 30 days after the first person contracts the virus. So I'm recommending 6 because I believe that we could be housebound for that long. And if you aren't housebound, if you aren't able to stay in your house for 6 weeks, you're going to have to go out into the public and go to the store or whatever it is that you need to do during that time, and you really increase your chances of being exposed to the virus once you leave your house. So self-quarantine, be prepared to stay 6 weeks, preferably longer. Be prepared to stay longer. I don't think many people will have to stay more than about 6 weeks, but it'd be a good idea if you have that much in the way of supplies on hand.
Do you think, and let me ask you this question, if we get into the situation where there's a lot of people that have the virus in the area, are they going to require people when you go to the store to wear a mask? What do you think?
I can't speak for what they will do. They may ration food. They may ration access to the store. They may send you home and not let you go to the store. And that's the part that's got me a little bit concerned, is if you don't have what you need now or relatively quickly, other people are going to recognize that something bad's going on, and it only takes about 3 days to empty a store. If this coronavirus gets really bad, we may find people not going to work, and some of those people could be truck drivers who are bringing food to the stores. And if they not go on strike, but if they just decide to self-quarantine, the stores would stop getting supplies, and then everybody's in a kind of a pickle. So the best time to start getting ready, and I went shopping today, bought a bunch of canned goods and non-refrigerated stuff. As it says on the slide here, the current situation doesn't forecast a shutdown of municipal services, electricity, water, sewage, garbage pickup, and stores and gas stations should remain open and functioning for the immediate future. But if the electricity does go out, your refrigerator is going to go out with it, and it might be in your best interest to have some food on hand that doesn't require refrigeration. Also, you want to eat your frozen foods first if we do lose power, because they will spoil pretty quickly without refrigeration. So your order of consumption would be your frozen foods, your refrigerated foods, and then you would start on your non-refrigerated or longer shelf life foods. And you can go on to the next slide.
What to do if forced indoors?
Okay. One of the things that you might want to consider doing, let's see what I didn't have a chance to get all these squared away after I wrote them down, but one of the things you might want to try to consider doing is building a safe room. And when I say building a safe room, a lot of people confuse a safe room with a panic room. A panic room is by nature something you go to when you're panicking. And if you've prepared properly, you don't really need to panic here, but you do need a place where you can go and seal it up with, I use drop cloths and paint edge tape, because it doesn't damage the paint. And you want to close up the area. If you got a lot of people with the virus in your area, the air is going to be contaminated, and I don't know how close you have to get to somebody to get to catch the virus, but it wouldn't hurt to have an area in your house where you can go and keep the any airflow out of your house, and you can seal up with drop cloths and tape all the windows and vents, under the doors, around the doors, and keep yourself isolated that way. Wherever your safe room is, it should have emergency food and water stored. And it also should have a means of communication, at least a battery-operated radio. And when I say a battery-operated radio, probably the best kind to have is a small one that has both AM and FM, the weather channels, and possibly shortwave radio. That may be the means of communication when other means of communication go down. The AM stations here can probably stay on the air for quite a while after the power goes out with generators and maybe some solar power. I'm not sure what they have. But it would be important to have a radio that you can tune into the local station, KGVY, whatever, or a Tucson station, and they can tell you or will be putting out about the local problems and where the concentration of the virus is, and where and when the virus seems to have subsided, so that it's safe to come out. So that's important. It'd also be a good idea to have a cell phone in your safe room or with you, and a means to charge it, because we don't know how long we're going to be in there. And one of the things that you want to keep in mind is an out-of-state contact. If you don't, when a situation arises in a local area, the cell phone sometimes gets saturated, and you can't make a phone call across town, but you can make a phone call out of town. And so if you're here and you've got kids in Tucson or Phoenix, you may not be able to call them directly, but you may be able to call your out-of-town contact and have them call back in, because the cell phone service will work outside of the local area. And then that way you can call Uncle Tom and have him call little Johnny and Mary and tell them that you're okay, and make sure they find out that you're okay. So that's an important thing to have in mind, as an out-of-state contact. And further, you want to have some kind of, you might want to keep reading material or some other entertainment in that place, because you might be there for a while.
And ladies and gentlemen, I just want to tell everybody we're speaking with Paul Fitch now, who does presentations for the Pima County Preparedness team in the local area, and he's talking about we're talking about coronavirus tonight, and our next slide here, Paul, is what to do if forced indoors.
Okay, that's the second slide of this series. Let's see what it says. All right, one of the other things you want to kind of keep in mind when you're, if we run into a situation where our ability to get food and sustain ourselves, people can lose their thin veneer of civilization. And some people's plan to survive under duress is to take the stuff that other people have taken the time to acquire. So I would recommend, if you are the kind of person who feels like you're safe with a firearm, it'd be a good thing to have in your safe room also, because you never know who's going to knock on your door in times of crisis. So it might behoove you to have that. And if you can, between now and when this all happens, if you haven't spent a lot of time understanding and working with firearms, find an instructor and get some practice and learn how to do it safely. And the other thing is that one of the reasons you want the radio in your safe room is the all clear. The radio stations, when the authorities have determined that the crisis has passed, will issue an all clear. And the only way you're going to find that if you're in your house is by listening to the radio or possibly a neighbor, but it's always good to get your own information. So you want to stay in your shelter until you hear an all clear if that's required. And moving on.
Moving on, we're going to talk about water. I have a question for you about water, Paul. What are some of the ways that people can, in their house, as it is right now today, how can they store some extra water other than maybe buying bottled water? Some of the ways that you think, some ways they can store water. I was thinking maybe filling up the bathtub with water and keeping that as a part of your water supply.
Yeah, when I was growing up, more or less, in South Louisiana, we had hurricanes all the time. And the first thing Mom would do when the first warnings of a hurricane showed up was take her Dutch cleanser and dishwashing soap and go wash the bathtub, and then seal the drain to make sure it was tight, and then fill it with water. We actually lived in a house with a private well, and whenever a hurricane came through, the power would go out because we had above ground lines, and so we drank water out of the bathtub until the power came back on. And that's still a good practice. If you have a bathtub, clean it out real well when the first signs of any need show up. And the bathtub will hold about 50 gallons of water, from what I'm understanding. You can also go and buy 5-gallon water cans. You want to be careful with the water cans because water is very heavy. A 5-gallon water can weighs about 40 pounds. And this is Green Valley, not Muscle Beach. So you want to be careful that you don't overfill these things and injure yourself moving them from place to place. The water recommendation, excuse me, in a crisis situation is a minimum of 1 gallon per person per day. And that's based on drinking, cooking, washing, general sanitation. So if there's 2 of you in the house and you want to be ready for 6 weeks, you want to have 84 gallons. Well, your bathtub will take care of a lot of that. And there's a bladder that you can buy called a BOB, a bathtub liner that actually has a pump in it. And you can put it in your bathtub, fill it from the spigot, and then seal that up. And then there's a little pump that just pumps water out of the bladder into whatever container you want to put it in. But it would be a good idea if you, like I said, got 2 people for 6 weeks. That's 84 gallons of water. If you got 5-gallon water jugs, that's what about 20 jugs, about 18 jugs to fill up and keep on hand. Water doesn't go bad, but it does get old, and so you want to rotate it. If you've got the water stored already, you want to keep it rotating so that it doesn't. And you want to keep it out of the sunlight, because sunlight in water creates algae, helps algae grow. So you want to keep that. You can also get water purification tablets, and you can also get a water sweetener from a RV store that you can put into your water that'll take the tank taste out of it and keep it fresh for you.
Yeah, we also, one of the things we've done, Paul, is we have some water filters, and they'll filter anything out of any water that you might want to put it in. It's pretty cool. We have a couple, 3, 4 of those on hand.
Yeah, water filters are an important part of your preparation plan. I have about 5 of them myself. There's one that's very popular. It's called a Berkey, and it's real easy to use. It looks like a church-type coffee machine. It's 2 pieces. The filter's in the top part, and you pour the water that you want to filter in there, and then gravity feeds into the lower part, and the part that it feeds into is very, very clean and pure and can be drunk straight from there. So water filters are important. It can be something as simple as a life straw. You can get those at Walmart also. Walmart has life straws and Sawyer filters. I was there today and looked at them. I already have a lot of those. And they're very good for taking almost everything out of the water that is harmful to you. One of the things that people don't appreciate is if you run out of water or run short on water, and the water from the city is either not usable or shut off completely, because you got about 40 gallons of water in your hot water heater, and you got a couple of gallons of water in the tank behind your toilet. Now, everybody kind of thinks, man, that's for the dog, but the water in the tank hasn't gotten to where it gets contaminated. Excuse me. And you can filter it too, because that water just comes straight out of the pipe into that tank before it goes into the toilet itself. So that's good drinking water in there. Again, you might want to filter it. I would, but you could do that. Now, food is not as critical as water. Like I showed you in the rule of threes, you can only go 3 days without water, but you can go 3 weeks without food. Now, you're not going to be in very good shape at the end of 3 weeks without food, but if you can take what you have and ration it, eat half rations for the duration, you can make food go a long way, and you won't get terribly weak for months eating half rations. That's the first thing to do in combat when things get out of hand, is they reduce the daily intake. But it'll keep you alive, and that's the main thing. And your order, I think I mentioned this, your order is to get if power goes out, get your freezer foods first, because they will spoil first, and then go to your refrigerated meats and vegetables, and then canned food. And then again, one of the thoughts is comfort food, which is just something to snack on, because if you're in quarantine, you're going to be bored to tears, and every once in a while, it's just nice to eat a Milky Way or something and break the routine.
Okay, I've moved to other considerations.
Yeah, other considerations. The slide hadn't appeared yet, but I know that we're looking at having your car, never let your car get below a half tank of gas. The average car around here will probably go 150 miles on a half a tank of gas. And if we had to evacuate in a hurry, you'd want to go someplace. 150 miles will take you past Phoenix. It'll take you over to Wilcox. It'll take you down to Nogales for sure. and you might even be able to get over to Gila Bend or something like that. And it may be that the concentration of the virus is in the Tucson, Green Valley area, and you just need to get somewhere away from that. And of course, it could be some other emergency that requires you to leave the area. So you want to be as mobile as possible. I don't recommend leaving your home unless you have a good reason to, because all your stuff is here at the house, and everything that you've gotten prepared will be here at the house. And you want to try to avoid having to throw everything in the car, because you will forget something important. But if you have to leave, be sure you can. That's the main thing. And the other thing on other considerations is stocking up on prescription and over-the-counter medications for flu symptoms and other non-COVID-19 illnesses. Just aspirin, cough medicine, cough drops, and you also want to have all your sanitation supplies, soap, shampoo, toothpaste. Make sure you have that all on hand, because you don't want to have to get up in the middle of all this and go to the store to get toothpaste. That would be a terrible reason to go get a case of the COVID-19 virus. So best to go and stock up right now while the danger is low. That would be my advice.
Do you think, and I'm wondering, Patty and I talked about this the other night, your prescription drugs, they usually give you a 3 month, 90 days now. That's about the max you can get on any prescription. I'm not sure you can get more than that. I don't believe you can.
Well, actually, you can.
Oh, you can. Okay.
What you can't get is free 90-day coverage.
Yeah.
Or further than 90-day coverage.
Right.
If you go to your doctor, and I go to the VA for all my prescriptions, and I will go into them and say, I want another 90 days, and they'll say, well, we can't give you another 90-day prescription for another 60 days. You just got your prescription, and I'll ask them for a prescription for the same medication, and they'll give me a prescription, but I've got to go take it to the drugstore and pay for it myself. And it's a small investment to have an extra 3 months of medication on hand in the event of an emergency. So it's something you can do. Just go to your doctor and tell him you want another 90-day prescription, and he'll look at you funny and say, well, your insurance isn't going to pay for it. And you say, thank you, and go to the store and buy it.
Good advice. Okay, I'll go to the next slide here. This is kind of a warning from the CDC.
Yeah, that came out yesterday, I believe, if I remember correctly. It was yesterday or the day before. The CDC is trying to prepare us for the fact that this could be a very, very disruptive situation. I've read things like if you can talk your boss into letting you telecommute to your job, that'd be a smart thing to do at this time, because that way you won't have to get up, get dressed, and go to work in the middle of a bunch of people who are hacking and coughing. So the CDC believes that, as I mentioned before, if the truck drivers start getting sick, they all congregate at the truck stops, and if just one truck driver has the virus, it could easily spread to a whole series of trucks in the same area. And once those trucks shut down, then so does all the food and medication and everything else going into the local stores. So one of my advices to everybody about prepping is to have some cash on hand. The conventional wisdom is to have enough cash on hand to cover 1 month's bills. Now, I have a little bit of a problem with that, in that if we have such a terrible breakdown in our system, it's likely that you probably won't be getting any bills, because, and I know I can't take my cash payment to my mortgage lender because he's in San Antonio, and my electric bill, it's up in Marana. I'm probably not going to go up there and pay them in cash either. So a lot of this is not critical. But what you will find is that when you get to the store, if there's been a problem with the electrical system, your debit card and your credit cards won't work. Now, the downside of that is the cash registers won't work either. But it may be that the store manager will accept cash to get especially cold items out of his store, because if he doesn't get them out of his store and sell them, they're going to rot in the store, and that causes him two problems. So it's good to have cash on hand. How much is up to you. You don't want to have a great deal of cash, but it certainly wouldn't hurt to have a couple $1,000s handy for emergency situations. The other thing that has been pushed is gold and silver. And I don't know if that's critical for this particular type of event. If it gets real bad, it would probably not be a bad idea to have some of that on hand too. So those are things that you want to kind of keep in mind when thinking ahead for what might be a good idea to have in your pocket when all this comes to fruition.
Yeah, one of the things I've heard recommend too, Paul, is keep 4 or 5 bottles of bourbon in your you can use it to barter with.
Yeah, barter is going to be an interesting thing that if we have a currency failure. Whiskey, cigarettes, guns and ammunition, although that is a really dangerous thing to trade to somebody. You don't want to hand somebody a gun who now knows that you have whiskey and cigarettes.
You got that right.
But yeah, barter we could be back into a barter system really quickly if we have a currency collapse.
Yeah.
And I do have some of that stuff on hand. I think what you're going to find is that people are going to first be wanting food. And that's going to be the thing that's going to be probably the greatest bartering tool, is to have cans of I don't know, Spam or ham or something like that. Something that will give people protein and keep them alive, because once they reach the point that they're drinking whiskey, they could get way out of hand. So you want to be careful about that.
Yeah.
And then we've got this is not a low priority because it is important, but one of the things we want to be careful about is if we lose power and we don't get water, if we can't get water because the pumps are not working because of no power, that means that the sewage system is also going to stop and back up. And it can be very, very dangerous. When you go into third world countries, what happens is the disease is caused by a lack of sanitation. So I recommend a portable toilet. Again, you can get this all at Walmart. You go to the paint department and you get a 5-gallon bucket, one of those big white buckets, and then you go back to the sporting goods section back there, and you get what's called a luggable loo. It's a toilet seat that fits right on top of that 5-gallon can. That's what it's made for. It's got a closing lid, and right in that same area you can find waste bags, disposable bags that are heavy grade, contractor weight garbage bags, but they're also enclosed in a big same weight Ziploc bag. So you line the bucket with this black bag, with the Ziploc bag between the bag and the bucket. You do what you need to do, and then when that has filled up to the point that you can't stand it anymore, you roll it up, stuff it down inside the Ziploc bag and zip that up, and that'll keep it pretty well self-contained. It's recommended also that you might want to put kitty litter in your bag too, because that'll absorb things and helps. A lot of the new kitty litters are good at odor control, and if you're going to be stuck in the house with a non-flushing toilet, odor control could be a pleasant thing.
Okay, that's really good advice. I hope everybody is taking notes, because that's I think that is important. So I'll go to the next slide, Paul.
Okay.
Care of medically fragile or patients with transportation issues.
Yeah, especially here in Green Valley. I was at a CERT meeting last night. I'm also the president of the local community emergency response team, and Chief Wonder, who's the fire chief for the Green Valley Fire District, gave us a really good presentation on how the fire department works here in Green Valley and what it does and that sort of thing. And one of the things that he stressed was the fact that Green Valley is big on people falling down and people having heart problems. So you've got a lot of people here, and some who are even worse off than that I consider medically fragile. If something happens, they need to be taken care of. It might be your neighbor, it could be your mother that lives with you, and it could be somebody else. But the important thing is we're going to need to take care of those people, because there's no way they're going to be able to take care of themselves. And so many people here in the Green Valley area are on oxygen, O2. And one of the concerns I have is that when if the power goes out, these oxygen concentrators that these people use will need power, and if they run out, then these folks will not have the electricity to run their oxygen concentrators. The other thing too is medications for these folks. The same thing as your own prescription medications, and you want to be careful if you can to make sure that they have sufficient medications on hand, and also some of the medications require refrigeration, and that can be an issue that needs to be addressed by somebody who has a working freezer, and that's something that you might want to check into and see if you know of anybody who does. So those are the kind of things that you want to be aware of and be prepared for. In any case, these are things you want to be prepared for. But if in the event of this coronavirus getting out of hand and us having to go into self-quarantine or government-mandated quarantine, as they're doing in China, they're locking down entire cities. I saw a picture today where I think it was in China, they'd actually just taken dirt and shoved it up into a tunnel that was going out of a city to make sure nobody escaped that way. And that's what I said. The government can get very heavy-handed when it gets panicky, and governments panic relatively easily. So the more prepared you are, the less you'll have to deal with the government, and the less you have to deal with the government, the happier you're going to be in the long run.
Oh boy, isn't that the truth? Yeah, I can see communist China they've probably got some heavy-handed things that they do over there that we don't even know about. So, okay, so tell us a little bit about the Pima County Preparedness Team and when you guys meet and where you meet and how often you meet.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to get a plug in here. This is a free service. Let me give you back a little back story on this. I instruct our CERT basic course. I instruct 3 courses in our CERT basic course. That's disaster preparedness, which is this a follow-on from, disaster psychology, how to take care of yourself and the victims in the event of a disaster, and then terrorism and a CERT, which is an adjunct program that we teach just to teach our students how to recognize terrorism, because terrorism is more of a crime than a disaster. I mean, it may result in a disaster if somebody sets off a bomb, but it's really a crime, and that's a police issue, not a rescue issue from our standpoint. So in teaching the disaster preparedness course, it dawned on me that that's about an hour and a half course, and I try to get as much information out as I can, but it's really more oriented to being prepared to go to work as a CERT team member to help the fire department. And I was thinking that probably there's a lot of information that I've gathered over the last few years, starting back when we were sailing, and had lived from Central America, and how to prepare for hitting the next port, which might or might not have what you want to eat or to fix your boat or anything like that. So I started preparing and stockpiling and prepping, and I've learned an awful lot in the last 8 or 10 years. So I thought I would take that disaster preparedness course and expand it to the individual, to tell each person how to prepare themselves. And it kind of goes in with the CERT program, because what we're trying to do is, if I can get my CERT people well prepared and set up for something as we're looking at here, then they don't have to worry about what's happening at home. They know their house is taken care of, their home is covered, and they can then go to work and help us with the larger disaster that we would work as CERT members. So our meetings are at 6 o'clock on the third Thursday of each month at the Canoa Ranch Golf Resort, which is down at the end of Camino del Sol. It's the big hotel on the left, not the golf club. It's the hotel on the left. There's a large meeting room right adjacent to the front desk, and we meet there at 6 o'clock. We usually meetings usually run about an hour and a half, and this what I've done is I've taken the rule of threes, as we saw earlier, and I've already been over air and water and what we can do to help ourselves in those conditions to be prepared. And this coming month in March, we're going to do shelter. And shelter is not just building a lean-to out of mesquite bushes. There's a lot of things about shelter that are important if we're going to be able to survive. And one of them is how to prepare a safe room that we talked about earlier in this program. So we've got a number of things we're going to talk about, and how to be better prepared for whatever emergency might arise in your household, in your family. And again, it's the third Thursday of each month at 6 o'clock at the Canoa Ranch Golf Resort. That's 5775 South Camino del Sol. And you can email me with any questions you have or any information you might want to pick up at Pima, Pima 19st at gmail.com. And that should do it.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that's Paul Fitch, and we encourage you all to, to attend the meetings and learn about these things. One of the things I want to cover before we hang up here, Paul, is we talked a lot about losing electricity, and there are a few things folks can do to help themselves with that. There are some. You can get some small batteries that are rechargeable. Keep them recharged to help you with your cell phones. You can get some larger power units that recharge to help you with small appliances, that type of thing. And then you can go all the way and get yourself a generator that'll power your house. Some of them run on gasoline and propane, and there are some large generators that you can have installed in your home, outside your home, that actually run on natural gas. So those are some things you can do. Now, those are kind of short-term solutions because I don't think you can get into running a generator for a real long period of time. But if you use it off and on at the time, it'll last you for a little while. So there might be some comments you'd like to make to that.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of generators for emergency preparation, especially gasoline generators, because gasoline, in order for the generator to work, you got to have gasoline. If there's an emergency, the gas stations are going to be shut down, so you're going to have stored gasoline, and gasoline doesn't store well. It loses its power pretty rapidly. Now, you can buy what's called stable, S-T-A-B-I-L, and that's supposed to make gasoline last for about a year, and that's good. And what I would recommend if somebody wants to depend on a gasoline generator is that you get 4 or 5 5-gallon cans of gasoline, and you fill them up. And when your car needs fuel, the first thing you do is you pour fuel from one of those cans into your car and then take it down and refill it. And if you do that on a rotating basis, you'll always have fresh gasoline in your system for your generator. But a generator to run your whole house is going to suck gasoline like a elephant. It's a big powerful generator, and it takes a big engine. It takes a lot of fuel. I personally am a fan of solar. I find my solar power is incredible. I haven't had an electric bill of $100 in 5 years, and that's summer, winter, air conditioning, and everything else. And now that's what's called a net metering system, and it's hooked into your electrical system, so that when the sun's shining like it did today for most of the day, I'm actually selling electricity to the power company. to Trico, and at night, then I use their electricity. So I'm only using electricity from them about half a day at a time, and I have been able to bank in this coming spring. I will bank enough electricity on these bright sunny days that my air conditioning is pretty much free in July, and I put a swamp cooler in, and I use that in June, and that's just a fan with a water pump, and the water's not free, but the pump, it doesn't pump. It just takes water pressure from the city,
Right.
and keeps the pad wet. And my swamp cooler keeps my living room it keeps it very comfortable. But I've measured the temperature coming out of the swamp cooler, and when it's 100 degrees outside in June with 4% humidity, the air coming out of the swamp cooler is at 60 degrees, and it really does a good job of keeping the whole house cool. In fact, my wife says the house is cooler with the swamp cooler than it is with the air conditioner, but I think that's because we keep the thermostat kind of high.
Yeah.
But anyway, I really like solar because it's quiet. The neighbors won't know you're running a generator, which will tell them that you've got power, and they may want that power, or want some of that power, or want something in that power. So a generator to me is a bad investment for emergency preparation. Now, for short-term things, sure, it's great. We had one on the boat, and we used it every other day to charge the batteries and to make water. But as far as had I needed just the power from that generator, I would have been out of gas in a week, and then I'd had no power whatsoever. So we had solar on the boat. Anyway, that would be my choice, would be solar. And if you can get an off-grid system, that would be pretty handy too, because once that's set up, then you're pretty much independent and free to use whatever power it generates with no noise and no gasoline issues and no fuel. You don't have to go buy more fuel, which in the case of a situation like where we would be if the power went out, you're not going to be able to get fuel anyway because the pumps at the gas station won't work. So those are my thoughts. Now, the other thing is you can also buy small solar panels that do nothing but charge your cell phone if you need that. Again, if the power goes out, the cell phone may not work either. So there's no pat answer for everything.
Yeah, I know, and we'll wind it up here, but I know there's they've recently started advertising some large power banks, Generac, and you've probably seen these that can store your solar power for you. So, and they're supposed to be pretty good. Generac has made a lot of progress with that, but I'm sure they're not cheap.
No, they are expensive. I've got the batteries on my off-grid system. I have 4 of them, and they're $650 a piece. So it's it is an expense, but then it can also be a lifesaver.
Yep. Okay, Paul, we really appreciate you coming on tonight. Thanks so much. And I think maybe we ought to do an update here in a few weeks and see where we're at, huh?
That'd be great. Yeah, I may know something by then.
Yeah. Okay, sir. So thank you again, Paul. That was Paul Fitch with the Pima County Preparedness team. We really appreciate him coming on tonight, and a lot of good information for you folks. You take care, Paul, and say hi to Mary Margaret.
And you to Miss Patty.
Thank you. Okay, everybody. We're back here in the studio, and I just want you to know that we really appreciate Paul coming on. That was great. We hope that's a lot of good information. We're running a little bit long tonight, so I'm going to wind things up here, and I hope you folks, we hope that you learned something tonight, and it was really a pleasure being back on again, and we'll see if we can't get another guest next week. And please stay alert with this coronavirus, and let's pray for the country and pray for the president, pray for ourselves, of course, and our families, and we'll get through all this, I'm sure. So keep your eyes and ears open, and You've got some contact information for Paul and the preparedness team if you have questions for him. And if not, you can send the information to the Sahuarita Tea Party at gmail.com. And we'll pass it on. So thanks, everybody. You have a great evening, and we will see you next week. Not sure it'll be Wednesday or Thursday, but we'll let you know. And again, don't forget to subscribe and click on the little bell, and you'll get reminders on when we're going to be on live. So God bless you all. Take care. Keep fighting, and we'll see you next week.